Does anybody else feel better about coronavirus now that the Surgeon General's here? Thanks for coming out and braving the world. I'm Joe. We were going to do a little bit of an intro about the state of loneliness in the world, and that was just done for us, which is awesome. I'm really excited to have brought this panel together with some people that are pretty dear to me. Manny, I consider to be my protege. He was my chief of staff like 10 years ago, and now whenever I meet people in San Francisco and I tell them that I was the first investor in Manny's, I become an instant celebrity. So it's wonderful to watch somebody who worked for you have such success. And Prophet and I met a couple years ago and co-founded Treehouse together. And then I met Ashley when they started organizing quilt events in initially our Treehouse office and then our Treehouse building. So it's been really great to bring this group together. And so as somebody who's built a number of software companies, realizing that creating physical community is so important and that in-person connection. So we're actually just going to spend the next 20 minutes of our panel just eye-gazing with each other. Which apparently doesn't work over Zoom, I'm told. So I want to jump right into it. And I, as kind of an opening question, each of the people on stage have had sort of personal experiences and a view of the world around connection and the state of our society that has led them to want to create physical space where people come together. And so I want to start by asking each of them sort of how what they've created comes out of their observations of the world, which, again, the Surgeon General so nicely teed up for us. I'm really grateful for that. So I'll start with Ashley.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Slide. I'll just keep going. It'll come.
Yeah, cool. Hi, everyone. It's one thing to, I think, observe the world. It's also, I live in it. And as a woman, I have been, and female identified, I've been exposed for almost 32 years to the experiences of what it's like to be a woman, to be, advertised to be under this government, to be within the society. And for me, I felt my entire life this feeling of isolation as I was continued to essentially be told, be a certain way. Be perfect, be this, work on yourself. Maybe you'll be one of the people that has the chance to rise or to get ahead. And I spent the past 10 or 11 years building community offline in a variety of different places, whether it was for Wanderlust festivals, whether it was at Neue House or social impact conferences, you name it. And I felt the same sense of isolation from all of the women that were around me. So, ultimately creating Quilt, because it's so much less about, I think, individual well-being, and it's about collective well-being. How do we advance the collective well-being of women? We come together, we have conversations, we realize that we're not alone in our experience, and from that, I think we can heal so much. So I built Quilt because it was my personal experience, and it just happened to also be potentially 51% of the population's experience as well. A very niche group.
Well, first of all, I just have to say what a tough act it is to follow Dr. Murphy and Dr. Burke Harris. Both are such amazing, amazing people. I had the privilege of working on both President Obama's re-election campaign and Secretary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2016. But I had left the campaign early because I was severely unhappy, and I fell in love with this ballet dancer and traveled with him while also feeling pretty lost. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I knew I cared about politics. My father is from Afghanistan and opened up a small business when he immigrated to Canada. And so it was always a dream of mine to open up my own small business, but I wasn't sure how to square the circle with politics. Right around the election of Donald Trump, I started hearing the same question being asked again and again and again, which was, I want to get more involved. I want to become more civically engaged. I'm waking up, but where do I go to do that? Where do I physically go to do that? And it struck me as strange that if you want to watch the Warriors game, there are 30 bars in every neighborhood where you can do that. But if you want to watch the presidential debates or Bob Mueller's testimony or the results of Super Tuesday in community, where are you going to go to do that? And the final nail in the coffin was I went to the Women's March in Los Angeles, and there were 1 million people there were so many people that there was no march. because no one could move. And my thought was, first of all, this is fucking awesome, and I'm so happy to be alive in this moment. And then where all these people are gonna go after the march is done? These are not all professional activists. We need to capture this energy. We need to bring it somewhere. And so I decided to build a physical space that would try to answer that question. Where do you go to become a better citizen?
And so, Manny, you have designed this physical space. Like, tell us a little bit, and maybe we'll get the slide back. We have a couple. I'm curious, like, when you're actually designing and setting up your space, how did you think about that?
Well, I should say that there were over 1,000 people who were involved in creating it. I'm one person, I put my name on the door, but it was very much a community effort. The overall thinking was, I tried to think of the place where all of us feel most comfortable being vulnerable, saying things that might make us not sound so smart, or asking questions, and it's our living rooms. I mean, if you think about the one place where you bring people into your inner sanctum and you can take your shoes off and be yourself, it's our homes, it's our living rooms. So it made sense to me to build a civic space that felt like a living room so that people could model that same behavior that they have in their own homes, meaning it's okay to ask dumb questions, it's okay to maybe sound not so smart, and hey, be comfortable. And the last thing is, the topics that we discuss at Manny's are super serious, sometimes really sad. Last night we had an amazing event on the San Quentin newspaper. It was called Prison Truth, a book that just came out. Heavy stuff. There were people in the audience who had been imprisoned for life, for 41 years. And so I figured we're going to have some heavy conversations in this space. I wanted the physical space to create an atmosphere where people felt uplifted and calm and relaxed, so that the tenor of the conversations wouldn't bring them down. So kind of to balance it out.
Thank you.
So I've approached building community from a varied life experience. I grew up in South Los Angeles during the height of crack cocaine epidemics and gang violence, and my family was particularly poor. And as I got older and got through life, I found myself to be really lonely and disconnected, far more lonely and disconnected than I was living in an environment that people otherwise looked down upon, right? It seemed this like dangerous place, this place that so much was wrong with. But the truth is, through all of the struggle, we held each other in community. Sometimes that meant cooking together and coming over one another's homes, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of fun, all the way down to more sombering moments of countless amount of standing in the middle of the street and holding a mother who watched her son or daughter pass away. And these were my sort of formative years and life experiences in community that really impressed upon me how valuable human connection was. And then when I was 16, I found myself incarcerated for the next 5.5 years of my life. And that also was a fascinating human experience, in that we had none of the social things that we tether ourselves to. We didn't have titles. In fact, my name was V92836. My name was gone. Everything was gone. We had memories and human connection in the moment. We ate together, we talked together, and that's how we often maintain one another's sanity. And then I came home and got super lucky throughout, whether it was going to college or meeting folks like Joe, and I found myself, from a professional standpoint, I was building actual physical space. I was building apartments and hotels and robotic parking structures. It was great, we were making money, it was fun, and I realized that through all of this, I was feeling really lonely. The wealthier I became, the more I was able to buy isolation. And the apartments that I stayed in, the apartments that I built, the doors were literally 5 feet from one another. We were doing all these calculations for efficiency ratios of how many units we can put into a space, and not thinking about how humans actually connect. And that hurt a lot. It hurt the thought that my daughter would grow up in a world that she'd be fundamentally disconnected from her neighbor. And so looking at how to solve that, I was like, well, the home is literally one of the, to Manny's point, one of the greatest places to come together, to live together, to talk with one another, to be vulnerable, to cry. And you couple that with a world that's, particularly in San Francisco and New York and major cities, Los Angeles, that has incredible density, building vertically is important. And so looking at space first and foremost from human connection, and how do we build buildings that create different nodal points of serendipity, and how do we take our, instead of a traditional lobby, that becomes in some ways a Manny's, and it's a a place for
co-branding.
It becomes a space for social dialogue. And in the laundry room, it's such a utilitarian activity that we all have to do, which is wash our clothes. Imagine turning that into an art studio and a place to connect and be together. And letting your room and your home be the sanctuary it wants to be, and a place to rest and recharge and come back. And so all those life experiences and seeing the loneliness there, and also beautiful human connection inside a place that most people would think terribly wrong and afraid of, but found deep connection with other humans.
So I wanted to ask Ashley, how, it feels like in trying to get people to be physically together, there's a lot of things about the way our current society and technology are structured that can make that challenging, that make it easy for us to just sort of like sit home alone. So I'm interested in how do you see sort of the forces of the world that make it challenging, and how do you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I look at social media and the time spent on technology as kind of one of those leading causes, but I also see that, we can use physical space. It's one of the most beautiful things out there for us to convene and to gather in, but we also can sometimes not feel welcome in those spaces. And so how do we do that? How do we use technology to support our desire to connect with new people and to go deeper with the people that we know? And so for us, it's been, our purpose has really been around, using technology to turn neighborhoods into thriving and inclusive third places, so that women can feel like they have support and connection and inspiration no matter where they are or where they go. So it still is about the use of physical space, but it's also about using technology in a way that can support and facilitate offline connection so that we can take the spaces that we have. We do partner with Treehouse, and the quilt community gathers there often, or local coffee shops, but we started by inspiring women to open up their own homes. Like, we have these spaces, and we can open these homes, and I can open my, former 400 square foot studio apartment in New York City that I actually did call Treehouse to make it sound like a little cuter. I was like, this is my treehouse. But I think about doing these things together because I built community offline for so long that I, at a certain point in my life, realized that no matter what was building for privilege, no matter what I did, because of location and access and price points. And so what does it look like to serve the underserved majority? Well, we have to think about our business models and how we use technology and how we can benefit from that. So I think of it as a very integrated, innovative way of commingling these two things instead of hating one or hating the other. So that's how we think about it a little bit.
And, Manny, you've, I think, done some pretty innovative stuff to try to have a really diverse community in Manny's. While, you're running a business in the heart of the mission in San Francisco in, many ways like the front wave of gentrification. And how do you think about making Manny's a place where people can have a cross-section of SF and everybody's welcome?
Well, I'm not going to name any names, but I did a mapping of where people gather in my city civically to learn about politics. And I found that there were pretty big gaps as it related to young people, folks of color, and folks that didn't have money or time to go to some of the traditional lecturing organizations. And so I thought a lot about access and equity as it relates to the physical space and the programming. So the way we do that is we never turn so half the programming is ticketed, half of it is free, roughly. No one's ever turned away for lack of funds. We give free coffee and tea away to anyone that needs it. In order to fund that, we ask anyone that buys coffee to pay it forward. The restaurant at Manny's is run by a nonprofit that hires and trains formerly homeless and formerly incarcerated individuals, teaches them in kitchen skills, and then places them into full-time employment. And I'm proud to say that Farming Hope, the nonprofit that runs the restaurant, has already placed 20 people from shelters or prison into full-time jobs since we opened a year and a half ago.
Woo!
And the final thing, which is I think the most exciting and which is what I think would allow a space like this to be replicated in other metropolitan areas and communities, is the idea of a community-funded programming and community engagement space. So we have about 400 people now, and we're growing it every day, of individuals that pay $36 a month to support the space, to allow us to have programming where we can answer the question, can I do this at your space, and not say, well, it depends how much money you have. Or can I come to this talk with Ezra Klein or Barbara Lee or Pramila Jayapal? I don't have a lot of money, can I still come? Absolutely. So the way we're able to open our doors to everyone is the community actually holds up the space and allows us to do it in a way that is equitable. The last thing I'll say, if I built a social justice space that was hosting social justice programming and only a small subsection of the community was there, that's failure, in my opinion. That's failure. That's not success. That's not actually accomplishing the goal. If we're going to have a conversation about criminal justice reform like the one we had last night, there needs to be formerly incarcerated people in the audience. There needs to be people who did not buy a ticket to be there, and it needs to be the kind of timing and space where anyone can walk in the door, regardless of where they're coming from. You know, we had to be within a 5-minute walk of mass public transit, because the second you have to take a car to get somewhere, who can afford a car? Who has a Lyft account? And so we really did think through all the various aspects of financial equity and also the programming to make sure that we weren't just creating another space that only catered to a certain section of the Bay Area.
Yeah. And so Prophet, when we were creating Treehouse, we set out with this goal of authentic connection and supportive community, and built a building, like from scratch building, as a way to do that. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time really wrestling with was, how do we have a balance between making a place that lets everybody in, but also has a set of commitments that leads to the type of community that we want. And so we've now been open like 4 months now, and Prophet's living there with his daughter. And so talk about how, and people are not really used to living this way. We have a building that has 60 units in it, and a bunch of shared space, a dining hall where we do Sunday dinners every week, and a library, and a lot of beautiful shared space. But the biggest challenge we thought going in was, how do we actually get people to move from what they know, which is living by themselves, to living as a community?
Yep. Yeah, so there was a ton of thought around the design and just how do you create collision points, right? That's one piece of it. We did all these early like study groups where people talked about how the old neighborhoods used to have pharmacies, and that's where people congregated, and there was just all these collision points. And that was important. But the thing that we realized in sort of modern society is that people coming together with a shared intention to be kind to one another, to be open to one another, to be curious about one another's story, respectful and candid during difficult conversations in different moments were important. And the reason for this, what we've now learned living in the space, is people in our building come from various backgrounds. We have affordable units where some folks can pay as little as $150 a month to folks that pay substantially more, different life experiences. We have the woman who started Black Lives Matter to robotics engineers who are living in our space. And they're different viewpoints, different ideas. And when you bring these people together and you're saying, hey, this is a comfortable space, this is your home first, you have to ensure that everyone's comfortable, everyone feels respected, and everyone feels cared for. And so right at the beginning of interacting with us, you fill out an application that starts with, are you committed to being in community? Are you committed to listening to your neighbor? Are you committed to respecting them? And what's come out of that, we have these things called tree talks that residents created that we didn't create it, we didn't see this coming. But it's a space that residents wanted to hold among themselves, not with our company, just to have these difficult conversations. And some of them,
Can you give an example of a difficult conversation?
yeah, so one is, it's interesting because people live here and I don't know if they watch it and it could be specific to them, but general to you. One is two different cultures, one from one place in the world and from a different place in the world. They show up differently, right? One person shows up with a ton of excitement and enthusiasm, and then someone's getting home from work and they're tired and they're working in the modern world and they don't want to interact with such enthusiasm. And on one end, that can be seen as not connecting with the community, and on the other end, it could be seen as insensitive. During a tree talk, there was an actual moment where that example I just gave actually happened, and someone came home and one person was frustrated and another person was let down. And during the tree talks, they had an open space that was safe to have a conversation of how that made them feel, how their cultures were directly opposed to that interaction. And what came out of this was then, how do we create a treehouse language that's familiar to the residents here to support each other in navigating these difficult dialogues. And so I think that just the proximity of space coupled with intention allow people to have these very vulnerable moments that hopefully bring empathy one to the other. The Surgeon General talked a lot about how much we need love and trust in the world, and I think that's core to what Treehouse is doing. And the only way to do it, I think, is to be in proximity with one another and to have a shared intention to trust and support each other.
All right, so we got about 3 minutes left, lightning round.
Ooh, my favorite part.
I don't run the conference, so I'm not allowed to take my panel over time.
What are they going to do, Joe?
That was like a little funny. So for each of you, what do you hope is the long-term impact of what you're working on 5-10 years from now? How is the world a different place because of this project?
Well, in the United States, there's over 19,000 cities. 10 of them have 1 million or more. 10,000 of them have 10,000 people or less. There's not a whole lot of opportunity going on in those worlds in the cities where there's less. I think for Quilt, my personal goal is really around inspiring at least 1 million women to step into this role as a leader, to lead community, to start your own community, to then have an impact on then millions, and so we're going neighborhood by neighborhood. Really, I think it really does start there and kind of bringing that Main Street feeling back. And I imagine sitting here right now that there were 10 million homes open with 10 women sitting inside each, and that feels like impact. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
For centuries, we gathered in person to engage in our civic life. And I think first and foremost of Harvey's Camera Shop right here in the Castro where I live, it was a physical place where people came together in the hope of electing our first openly male gay official. And so we've seen in the last not so long much of our civic discourse and life moving online. I think to the detriment and to the reduction in the health of our civic life. And so what we're seeing now, and I've seen in my space, people coming from Milwaukee and Pittsburgh, Denver, New York, and saying, I need a space like this. I want a space like this in my community because I want to talk about these things in person. And what I would see as an amazing kind of future vision is to bring back these physical civic spaces which have been so necessary for a healthy civic life and discourse. I think we need it. I think people are thirsty for it. I know they are because they tell me. And I would imagine that if we had spaces like this in every community where people could watch the debates, or folks who support different presidential candidates could watch the Super Tuesday results together, hold each other a little bit to start that unity in person, I think it would actually make a major difference in our politics and how we see each other as Americans and as united in civic life.
I'll be quick. I think for Treehouse, if we're 1 or 2 million of the 10 million homes that quotes in, and
Your home included.
one of the many civics vessels for the civic spaces that Manny's in, primarily for human connection. I think us being in proximity to one another is extremely, extremely important. It builds empathy, it builds understanding, and it ultimately protects the most vulnerable of us in society. That is the whole point of community, that's the point of tribe. And I think when we build these buildings, when we build these spaces, our major point, the thing we look at, is does it feel like home? Does it connect people to one another? And that's it. It's not about can we build more and more real estate, it's more can we actually bring all of us together? Conferences are incredible. You know, the different private clubs, the different civic spaces, all incredible. But I still believe in the home. I still believe in the vulnerability of the home and people coming there to rest, to unpack, to be vulnerable. And Treehouse will be a major part of that. So.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.